Hey, Jim, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to join us on the podcast and share your experience with building Nirmata. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Raj. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we get started off first with talking a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about Nirmata as well. Obviously, we're going to cover that as part of the pitch and the people process pieces, but just a little bit about yourself and your background will be helpful for the listeners.
Sure. So my background is in software engineering. I graduated from my master's degree in the mid 90s from the University of Illinois, and started work in the telecommunications industry, right?
Sure.
So I started in that telecommunications network management space, worked at Bell Labs, at Motorola, and then in the late 90s moved out to west to California, to Silicon Valley. Worked at a variety of different startups, at Jetstream Communications, which was a voice over DSL CLEC play, so also in the telecommunication space. Then went to Trapeze Networks in the wireless networking space. They were one of the early companies that brought WLAN. Today, of course, we take Wi-Fi for granted, but those days it was still a very novel concept. And then went to Panalogic, which was a VDI company for virtualized desktops, and ended up at Cisco, where I ran a team that was doing cloud computing, right? So there I got, my role at Cisco was a slight step away from product and engineering and development roles. It was more leading a consulting team, and this was something that I specifically chose because I wanted to work very closely with customers, and I was fascinated with how these large solutions got built. So it gave me a lot of exposure to working with large enterprises, service providers, doing early cloud and virtualization projects, right? And that is where sort of the early ideas for what we are building and what we're bringing to market at Nirmata came about, as we kind of saw what was happening to the infrastructure as a service layers, and how that would transform even software and application development.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Thanks for the background. Yeah, it's an interesting story, and I think the last part of picking the role at Cisco to sort of get more customer interaction certainly makes sense. In terms of trying to start and build something on by yourself at a later point in your career. So yeah. So let's sort of moving on in terms of the origin story. I think you mentioned that that's where you got the ideas. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about the pitch, right?
Yeah.
What the business and product vision for Nirmata is, and sort of what you're trying to help customers in your journey.
Yeah. Yeah, quite simply, our mission is to empower autonomous teams to manage mission critical applications, right? Today, there's a lot of technology in the stack, like containers, Kubernetes, cloud providers. But if you kind of step back and think about it, everything we do today, how we are kind of, whether it's in our work lives, in our personal lives, everything is powered by software. Businesses run on software. If the internet goes down, or one of the major sites, whether it's like a news provider or even a service provider like AWS goes down, hundreds or thousands of businesses can be impacted, right? So coming from the telecommunication space again, what we had seen is, and there's something that was drilled into me when I started at Bell Labs was, look, what we're doing here, lives depend on this, right? So, to make a phone call, yes, of course, it could be for entertainment or for, just reaching out to somebody, but in many cases, it could be an emergency and that phone call must happen, right?
Yep.
So similarly today, if you look at it, businesses depend on software in that manner, but it's dauntingly complex to build, run, operate applications at scale. So our mission was, we saw that, and at Cisco, I saw the infrastructure as a service layer go from, data centers, with a lot of technology that companies like Cisco and others were building, to cloud computing with what AWS was, at that time, still in the very early phases of growth. And then how services like Netflix and others were taking advantage of that to become what we now know as global powerhouses, right? And in their domains. So what was fascinating to us is, okay, how do we empower every software team to operate like a Netflix, to operate like a Google at scale? And really the same philosophy, again, tying it back to our roots. And my background, it's interesting. My co-founders, Ritesh and Damien, they both come from a very similar type of path, right? So Ritesh, in fact, he went to his grad school at Michigan State. He worked at Motorola also in the same group that I was at, but a few years after I had left, right? So we did not cross paths there. And then, he also ended up in the Bay Area and ended up, I met with him at Trapeze Networks, where we were part of the early engineering team. Damien and I met at Jetstream Technologies, and he was with one of the vendors that was selling into Motorola, into that wireless communication space. So all of us had this similar journey where we were seeing the evolution from internet and communications to software becoming the dominant force in all of our lives. And now the need to manage applications at scale, much like we had seen the management of complex systems, complex networks in data networking, wireless communications, things like that. I mean, if you again, you pick up a phone, you expect that service to be always on and to be always provided. And the question we started out trying to solve in our mission, has been kind of consistent all the way through, is why can't we have the same for applications, right? Why is it so complex? Why are there so many potential failures, security breaches, other issues that folks have to deal with, teams have to deal with, to deploy, operate, manage applications at scale? So that was the initial kind of idea around Nirmata, and continues to be. Nirmata, as you may know, is an Indo-Aryan word for architect or director, right? So we thought the name was very fitting because it kind of orchestrates. You can think of it as a control plane for applications, and for global teams that are managing these applications. So what we wanted to kind of do, and as the technologies we were looking at those times, like on top of the infrastructure as a service layer, were things like Cloud Foundry, Mesosphere, but none of those seemed to be what would be necessary for to unleash this level of productivity, right? So what happened around that time frame in 2013 is there was a small company called Dot Cloud in the platform as a service space that was building, and every platform, every PaaS had their own technology to package applications underneath. And they were packaging these applications in something known as containers. So much like in the shipping industry or the transportation industry, you could have several different things you need to move from point A to point B, but all of those are put in standardized containers, and that makes it easy for that container to go from kind of a freight train to a truck, to a ship, and it's all very standardized, and there's guidelines to govern all of that across the globe, across the world, right? And this empowers the entire shipping and transportation industry. So similarly, in the software space, Dot Cloud, they unleashed this technology called Docker, which made it very easy to package applications as containers. And once that came onto the scene, we fell in love with that technology. We started doing work in the Docker ecosystem, and did initially some consulting, working with larger companies who were moving into this microservices style architecture, adopting containers. We brought some products to market too, and this was back in 2013, 2014, but did not really see that potential for growth in the Docker ecosystem. And our kind of thinking was always, we wanted to play the long game. We're not in a kind of, this is not something, the technologies we're building are going to be here for the next 10, 20 years, and will change exactly everything we're doing. in the software, again, management space, right? So from that point of view, we wanted to make sure we took our time and kind of grew the company, grew the business at the right inflection point. And that happened around 2017, 2018 is when we saw Kubernetes had emerged as the clear leader. And Kubernetes is a software system that was, open source by Google. It's now part of the Linux Foundation. So much like Linux powers a lot of our servers and compute infrastructure, Kubernetes has very rapidly become the standardized operating system for applications on the cloud, right? So whether and by cloud, it doesn't necessarily mean just the hyperscalers. It could even be a private data center that's acting as a cloud computing system, where you're pulling together servers. Famously, around that time frame, around 2014, is when Google kind of disclosed that every workload you use from Google, right, whether it's search, Gmail, ads, maps, whatever it is, all of these run as containers on their internal system, which was something called Borg, and now Kubernetes evolved out of those systems. It's there's a huge community, a group of vendors, including Nirmata, that contribute to Kubernetes, and we're kind of building solutions around this to make it easy to use and become the platform of choice for enterprise applications or any application across, whether it's cloud, data center, or even edge deployments.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. I think that was helpful to understand the sort of vision that you have for Nirmata as you've evolved over the years. So speaking of company values, just want to understand a little bit better. I saw on your website you've sort of broken down values across core values, permission to play values, and tactical values. So just curious as to sort of how do you distinguish across the three, right?
Right.
Obviously core is clear, but the permission to play and tactical values, how does that fit in terms of what you do as a company, as a team, right?
Right. Yeah. So certainly, there are values which are very fundamental to us. And as myself, Damien, Ritesh kind of started Nirmata, we got together and kind of said, okay, what type of organization do we want to build? What kind of company, do we want Nirmata to be? And we wanted to make sure we were well aligned on those, right? So what was very clear to us is the type of folks who would be successful at Nirmata and around us as we build a team are the ones who shared that same core values of always being, kind of looking to learn, always looking to improve, to not have any egos, to be able to kind of, play different roles. And one of the things we kind of list, which is a little bit controversial, is we're all willing to mop the floors, right? And we really mean that, is to say, we will do when it comes to our customers, when it comes to delivering value and to our, whether it's our shareholders, our customers, our employees, all of us are willing to do what it takes, right? None of us are going to hold back. We're all in, and we're all going to kind of, deliver and succeed together. The permission to play values are more what we think about as the basic. It's almost like the entry ticket, right? So we want to make sure that people have those as we're interviewing, and we go through our interview process. And our candidates have commented is fairly long, fairly elaborate, because we want to make sure that folks coming in have those right, that right alignment. And then certainly tactical values are things we follow day to day. So we're obsessed by our customers and delivering value to them. And it's not just about there's this, of course, you want to listen to your customers, you want to get the feedback, but you also want to kind of help the customers by thinking one or two steps ahead of where they are today, right? So our customers lean on us to show them or to guide them towards, or at least highlight the options available, the choices available, and always being fair and true to them, right? So if our solution is not the best fit, we're the first to let our customers know. But if it is the best fit, and if it can evolve to be, we're also the first to let our customers know that, right? So it's definitely, we see this as a relationship that we build up over time and continue to grow and invest with. And we have customers, who are now into, to several of our, enterprise customers sign multi-year contracts and have renewed multi-year contracts, which as a small company, as a startup, we're very proud of, right? Because these are large enterprises powering millions of, users across the globe in different, sectors, and they are leveraging Nirmata to empower how their engineers sort of gain agility, how they're able to deliver software to their customers itself.
So yeah, thanks for walking through that. So continuing along in terms of the people aspect of it, you talked about your co-founders. You'd worked with them earlier, so that's the sort of founding team. But as you sort of grow the organization, you talked about some of the values you look for in the people. That's one aspect of it. But once you sort of get them on board, how do you get them on the same page and how you function as a team, right? Like things like
Right.
collaboration, conflict resolution, just a little bit about that in terms of how you operate as a team, just so that it's helpful for others to understand how
Right.
your organization functions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's super important because, of course, in any family, in any team, there's always some, kind of conflict or a little bit of drama, and that keeps our lives, to some ways entertaining, but as well as, kind of productive, right? Because I always, kind of, first of all, one of the things we tell everyone, and as people come into Nirmata, whether they're interns just starting out and early in their career, or very seasoned experienced folks who are kind of have seen and built several teams and companies and products in the past. None of us should have a fear of failing, right? And we kind of come together, we want to work hard. And in fact, one of the things I always mention to folks is, if you're not failing at some things, we're probably not trying hard enough, right? Because if everything's perfect, if we're getting everything right, we need to push ourselves more. We should be failing at least, like 10%, 20% of what we're taking on, because otherwise we're not taking on challenging enough goals, right? So that's one of the first things, and everybody learns when they come to Nirmata is, look, we want to set really big ambitions, big goals, and meet those. And the second thing is, there's no idea which is considered a bad idea. We kind of listen to as feedback or inputs or ideas come in from everybody in every role. We're very open in terms of that communication, as well as kind of taking that feedback and incorporating it into the right places, right? So it could be back into our culture and our playbook, back could be in the product area, could be anything, right? So certainly from that point of view, one of the things we had to go through is, as we kind of went from a small team, we also then expanded, in, so our teams are based in San Jose mostly, as well as then in Bangalore, India. And now we have, once the pandemic happened, of course, on both in the India offices, as well as in the US, everyone went fully remote, right? So we had to adapt to that and come up with some guidelines and best practices. And in fact, it's one of those things that now we look back and I think about, why didn't we do this sooner, right? Because it frees up, especially in what we do. I mean, there is a need to meet face to face, and we try to do that in each location at least once a month. But at the same time, there's a lot of efficiency to be gained, both in our from cutting down on things like commute times, cutting down on travel, as well as being able to have some flexibility in scheduling, things to that nature, right? So some of the best practices we've been able to put into place are emphasizing asynchronous kind of communications as much as possible, using the tools that we have in place for that, getting everybody, one of the things we often overlook as engineers is, we don't think about communication and writing as important skills, right? But what we find as we kind of progress into our careers and as we are mentoring folks coming into Nirmata, those are probably as important, if not more important, than being able to kind of solve a problem, right? Because yes, you can solve the problem, but if you can communicate to others how you solved it and why you chose the solution, that's what really matters, right? Because communication skill is key. So those are the sort of things we really emphasize and the type of team and culture we're building. I mean, conflicts, of course, like, and it's good to have some differences of opinions and diversity in opinions. So certainly from a technical point of view, we highly encourage that, right? And say that bring different, viewpoints to the table. And we have to listen and kind of see which one works best and which one doesn't. We're also major contributors in open source. So because we are an open core community, our company from a business model point of view, we work with Kubernetes quite heavily. So we interact with several other vendors, several other companies, and teams all across the world, in the open source community, right? So that also instills another level of discipline, culture, and a sense of within the CNCF especially. And it's interesting, right? Like the internet initially, when it came about, online personalities tended to be very different than in person, right? You could be polite to somebody in person, but back at that time people thought that they could get away being perhaps rude or something else online, right?
Yep.
Nowadays, and the type of community that CNCF is the governing body for Kubernetes. Our open source projects, one of which is called Kiverno, are also part of CNCF. But they emphasize kindness and proper. They have a lot of good best practices in place for how teams and folks should communicate to each other, work with each other, as well as being open and embracing to diversity and to difference again, whether it's set of opinions, backgrounds, cultures, whatever it may be, right? So certainly we cherish all those values and we embrace them and also incorporate them in everything we do within Nirmata itself.
Great. Thank you. Thanks. And I guess the next piece of it in terms of the process, how you build and, make and operate things at Nirmata. Just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of, the hypothesis testing aspect of, your product and solution. How do you sort of engage with customers in that path of, building your stuff and then validating in terms of, meeting the customer needs and so forth. Just
Right,
more of the approach that you've taken. Obviously, one thing that you talked about is the open source model. I don't know when you started, maybe you had a different approach and then evolved to sort of an open source
right,
model, things like that, right? What sort of hypothesis you started with, and how you evolved that over a period of time.
right. Yeah, so certainly whether it's our sales and go to market, as well as on the engineering side, we always adopt an iterative process in terms of, take a few steps, kind of then and stop and reevaluate and then proceed further, right? There's this great, kind of thing, something called the OODA loop, which I think, if I recall correctly, it was something that fighter pilots are trained in how to process any situation, right? And it kind of it's the acronym is OODA. So it's something about like observe, orient, decide, and act,
Mhm.
right? And that's a really good framework which we follow for pretty much everything we do, right? So you have to observe and assess things around you. You have to orient yourself to your surroundings and changes in those, but then you have to make a decision, right? You can't kind of be numb. The worst thing to do is to not decide and not act, right? But you do that and you can repeat that loop, I guess if you're a fighter pilot, maybe several times a second. If you're running a startup, maybe it's a little bit slower than that, but sometimes it does feel like we're making those decisions very rapidly as information is coming at us, as changes are being made, right? And even in our go to market, like you mentioned, we did start with a more traditional enterprise sales model. We closed some very large deals, large customers. So I had, good success with that. But really, again, for us to build a scalable business, a scalable brand that lasts for decades, the thinking was, we have to understand how the buying process works today, and even just take us for as consumers, right? I remember the first car, like after I graduated and got my first job and saved up some money, and wanted to buy my first new car. I actually went to a library and got a book on how to buy a car, right? Because to me, like, it was a terrifying thought about going to a dealer and trying to negotiate, and because I had no idea, what do I ask for, what do I do. So that to me, the source of information was a book, and I read through that and prepared myself and went to buy a car. Now fast forward today, 20 years later, you can get all of the information you want from YouTube. You can find out every last detail and be a much more knowledgeable consumer. And you can know the product you want to buy. You can fall in love with it even before you touch it or you see it, right? And a lot of people today, and even in our family, as we purchased a car about a year ago or so, everything was done online and the car was delivered to us, right? So it was a extremely different experience. So relating that back to Nirmata and what we're doing, my thought process always is like, okay, if that can happen for these big life purchases, why isn't that the model we follow for enterprise sales and enterprise software, right? Why not let our customers fall in love with the product even before they come to our salesperson and want to use the product? So that's the power of open source. That's the power of SaaS and cloud-based technologies, that customers can really get engaged with the product, can use it, see how it solves their pain points. There's nothing hidden anymore, right? They understand, and when they come to us, they're ready to buy. And we're seeing that cycle kick in, and it's extremely powerful. It's something that no company that's still trying to do classic sales can compete with that, right? Because the reach of open source, the reach of the ability through community driven, and that experience that users get is also so much more satisfying, right? And today, of course, developers are the ones who are influencing, if not making, those type of decisions in terms of what software gets used, what kind of technologies get used, and how enterprises are doing their buying. So all of that led us to move heavily into the open source. And it's not just about using open source for marketing and sales, but really being very active in the community, right? Because to us, we want to shape the future of Kubernetes. We want to be ones that make Kubernetes secure by default, consumable by every enterprise, no matter, again, whether they're cloud-based, data center, or edge-based, whatever type of software they're building and deploying. That's kind of what motivates and drives us.
Great. Thank you. Thanks. That was helpful to understand how it spans not just your go to market side, but also shapes your how you develop and yeah, build these solutions. Um, Thank you. Thanks, Jim. It was fantastic talking with you, understanding the journey of how you started Nirmata, how we've evolved over the period of time, building Nirmata, and sort of the process of building Nirmata. Want to wish you and the team the very best, and thank you once again for taking the time to come on and share your story.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Raj.
Thank you. Thanks.